Hi, good afternoon. We're actually starting a little bit early, which is kind of unusual for conferences. So my name's Robin. I'm a journalist. I run a website called tech.eu, so I write about the European tech scene. I'm joined by Dominik Richter, who's one of the founders and the CEO of HelloFresh, which I'm sure, especially here in Berlin, doesn't really need an introduction. But I'm still going to ask you for one. What's HelloFresh? What do you do?
So I'm Dominik, entrepreneur. Started a company called HelloFresh 4.5 years ago. So with HelloFresh, the vision that we have is to really make home cooking accessible and to say that if you are someone who can commit to cooking at home, we want to make it as easy, as accessible for you to actually do that and basically take all the hassle out of it. And I think on a, let's say, grander scale of things, what we're really into is basically making sure that we can provide people with healthier alternatives than what they would usually choose for. So the way that it works right now is basically you subscribe to a plan, and then once per week, we'll deliver a box with pre-portioned, super fresh ingredients to your doorstep so that you can basically cook a number of meals in 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and have a delicious and nutritious dinner on the table.
Gotcha. So it's a meal kit delivery service that works on a subscription model. The fact that you choose overall mostly healthy ingredients, is that part of your mission, or is it just because the customers demand that?
So I think first of all, if you look at the kind of ingredients that we send, it's never processed food. It's always like fresh food. And I think for like 90% of the people, that's already like the healthier alternative than what they would usually choose. And I do think that there is certainly like a big mega trend going on, which is people are way more conscious about what they eat, way more conscious kind of like where the stuff stems from. And we actually, with the model that we pursue, have the opportunity to make it very transparent. Where are your tomatoes from? Where are the potatoes from? Where is each and every single ingredient from? We're not yet doing like a super great job in always kind of like letting you track back, but we're actually doing an awesome job in picking the right suppliers, auditing our suppliers, and in the future, I think you'll also see a lot more of kind of like that layer of transparency that will get it across through our blog, through our recipe cards, through all the content that we basically create.
Got it. You mentioned your suppliers. Who are your suppliers of these ingredients? Is it local farmers? Is it mass distribution centers? Is it the same suppliers that supply the big supermarkets? Where do you source your ingredients from?
It's a big bunch of suppliers. I think it also has changed a lot over the 4.5 years that we've been active. So I think in the very beginning, for us, the most important thing was really to minimize complexity while obviously like meeting certain quality thresholds. But we were mostly buying, let's say, wholesale, etc. in the beginning. And then over time, as we have scaled and we have like much more volume, we've been, we have started to build out our own procurement departments. And now what we're doing for each of the categories like meats, dairy, produce, fruit, veg, we always have a certain, let's say, bunch of suppliers that we've audited, that fulfill certain quality standards, etc., that we're regularly visiting. And across those who we have onboarded, we basically spread out the orders that we have per week. And I would say at the moment, it's like about 50-50 between directly producers and wholesale. But certainly the ambition is to, hopefully at one point, like go even further in the value chain and actually say like, maybe we can grow our own stuff.
Right. Great. So the good thing about your model, I guess, is because it's food, it means it's not a luxury product. Everyone needs to eat. Would you say you compete against restaurants or takeaway ordering sites, or do you compete against supermarkets where people go to buy their own ingredients and recipes?
Yeah, I think it's a good question because there's obviously there is a bunch of let's say, directly competitive services that also offer meal kits, but in the end, that's not so much what we're looking at. The kind of framework that we tend to apply when we think about our market and when we think about our customer segments is really to say, people eat about 90 meals per month, and everyone subconsciously sort of makes a decision how to allocate their food budget. And you might do takeaway once or twice a week, you might go to a restaurant, you go to the supermarket for some certain meal occasions, and hopefully, you also do 3 or 4 meals per week with HelloFresh. So what we're really focused on is to have a great value proposition for weeknight dinners. That's kind of like at the moment what we're focusing on. But overall, what we really see as our market is to say, out of those 90 meals, at some point, for how many can we as HelloFresh deliver you with all the stuff that you need to actually, follow a healthy and sustainable lifestyle.
Right. As you scaled up the company, the distribution of the actual packages that you deliver to customers directly, does that happen in centers that you rent? Is it your own fulfillment centers? Or how has that evolved over time in the last 5 years?
So again, I think obviously very rapid progress over the last 4.5 years. In the beginning, we did everything ourselves, basically packed it in the back of our offices, then had our very first small fulfillment center. At some point, when we were going through a big phase of growth, we actually said, let's reach out to fulfillment partners who can help us scale. Because if you're in that massive growth phase, it's very, very hard to actually figure out how big a fulfillment center do you need. How big will you be in 6 months, in 9 months, and 12 months? And at the same time, you're also resource constrained because you don't have unlimited funding. You actually need to always kind of like, make sure you have as much runway as possible. Hence, for us, the best solution in that phase of growth was really to say, we have a third-party company that we pay on a, let's say, per fulfilled box basis, and we can scale up with them. And then basically, once we saw that consumer demand is very strong, that this is a category that's, that's here to stay, that's not gonna go away, and that's still growing fast, at some point we said, okay, over the long run, it's strategically very important that we own it, so that we can innovate, that we can really make sure we apply the right care and the appropriate care to all the processes. And that's basically when we made the decision to invest in our own fulfillment centers. And right now we have 12 fulfillment centers globally, of which I think 7 or 8 we operate ourselves, and the others with third-party partners. And I think, thinking 5 years out, it's probably a part of the supply chain that we want to fully own and control.
Right. So in time, you might be a partner for other service providers that use your warehouse kind of as a fulfillment partner as well, or not?
I mean, it's not top of our agenda to become a fulfillment partner. I think generally, like the way that we see HelloFresh and what we're really concerned with is to say we want to build up HelloFresh in a really well-liked food brand, and not so much kind of like go into, let's say, white labeling for other partners or fulfilling for other partners. That's at least at the moment like nothing that's on our agenda.
Got it.
But I think, on a theoretical basis, we'd probably have the capabilities to do something like that.
Very interesting. I'm going to ask you a series of questions that you need to answer with a number. How many countries are you operating today?
As of today, 9.
9. How many employees?
Around 1,200.
How much funding raised?
Roughly 300 million.
Euros or dollars?
Euros.
It's euros. How many packages do you deliver per month?
Last public figure that we published was 8 million meals per month.
8 million meals, up from how many last year around this time? What's the percentage growth, roughly?
Last year, so in the first quarter, we grew 200% year on year. So, given that, we had about, let's say, 3 million meals last year.
That's quite impressive. Yeah, you mentioned 300 million raised. Obviously, because you have your own fulfillment center and you employ 1,200 people, it's a pretty capital-intensive business. How close are you to reaching break-even or profitability even?
So traditionally, we've actually been a very capital-efficient business. So for a very long time, we actually consumed very little cash, and we had been at a point where we were basically break-even across the whole company, and then made the conscious decision to say we want to invest more because we think long-term, kind of like over a 3-year horizon, that's really kind of like what's the best for the company. And that's when we raised like large parts of the kind of like and the more recent funding rounds to really put that into building out our infrastructure. So generally speaking, we are in a position where we can very much control if we want to push for growth and grow 200, 250% year on year, or if we want to kind of like grow more pedestrian and actually say, we're happy with 50%, 70% growth per year, and then we're very close to profitability. So as of now, out of the 9 geographies, we have 2 who have been profitable for a very long time, and another 2 or so which are kind of like on the brink of profitability.
Got it. One thing I didn't know that you mentioned in the conversation we had just before this session was that the US is actually your biggest market already. And you only launched there about 18 months ago. So tell us how that happened.
So we soft launched in the US about 2.5 to 3 years ago. Kind of like kept it very small, tried to verify all the hypotheses that we had and all the learnings that we made on the European market. And then about, I think it was in September 2014, again, made the decision to really expand to the US nationwide, opened up 2 more fulfillment centers. And ever since September 2014, we're basically active nationwide in the US. And since that time, have grown to like a very high 3-digit million run rate in that kind of like 18 months time span.
But then most of the other markets that you operate in are in Europe. You're still headquartered in Berlin. So do you find it hard as you scale the company to find the talent that's required to grow a company to that size and to grow as fast as you are?
I mean, for us, we started the company in Berlin. We're, in a way, a fairly decentralized company because I think food is something which is very local. Taste is very local, and also the supply chains that we need to build up and that we need to rely on are very local. So there is a certain number of functions that we do from Berlin. So for example, all of our engineering is in Berlin, all of our analytics is in Berlin, but when it comes to running supply chains, culinary, etc., that's fairly spread out. So apart from the 12 fulfillment centers that we have another 9 offices, so it's like over 20 locations. So in that sense, Berlin is still home and Berlin is headquarter, but I myself and my co-founders and the senior management team members are actually like traveling around a lot and really making sure that we can kind of like build a global company and sustain like a global company culture.
Right. I want to get deeper into that because I'm always interested in the way that companies, scaling comes with different challenges. It's capital, it's whether it's opening offices, new markets that have different, specifics, which you already mentioned. But it's also the company culture that you mentioned that I think is very important. How do you maintain that? Like with 1,200 people, it's obviously changed quite a bit since you started. So how do you cope with that as the founder?
So I think, first of all, I'm a strong believer in, let's say, leading by example. So I think it's really important that, like we as a senior management team, but also kind of like cascading down through the organization, that you really kind of like have leaders that, are basically a good example to all the people that work for them. And what I mean by that is, starts with like being on time, being punctual, being there for performance management reviews, all of these things. And I think that's a company culture that we've implemented very early on. And we actually also still have a lot of people that have been with us for 3 years, 4 years, etc. So people that basically live and breathe HelloFresh and that have risen through the ranks over the years and which have very much ingrained that culture. And I think, and that's also what we're trying to teach them, to basically, that they are those kind of culture carriers and that they need to pass on the, let's say, what we define as our unique HelloFresh culture and our set of values. In the end, like culture, the way I define it, is basically the set of values that kind of like, that basically is responsible for how you treat each other, how you interact with each other, and basically it's the kind of like implicit set of values that you have in the company that without having to state it, everybody follows subconsciously. Right. And that really kind of like, I would say, cascades down through the organization, starting from the leaders and then kind of like making people aware that subconsciously people follow other people.
Gotcha. Okay. On the flip side, any mistakes that you've made that you want to tell entrepreneurs not to make?
I think there is mistakes that we have every week. I think generally on a company level, like a lot of things have happened when we were still fairly small. I think in the end, the kind of approach that most companies have is there is 1,000 things to do. So in the end, if you start out and if you're growing fast, then you kind of like tend to break things and things tend to break down. But then if something breaks down, it's actually the kind of like impulse to say, hey, let's spend some time on this, let's fix it, and let's make sure that we take into consideration all the other things that could go wrong, and let's find a process so that it doesn't happen again. And that's kind of like how over time you hopefully get better. But like I said, we're still like making a lot of mistakes, both on a personal level as well as on a company level. But hopefully the mistakes get smaller and smaller in scope.
Right. And you're still around, so not that bad a mistake yet. So it's very hard to talk about HelloFresh without talking about Rocket Internet. They were one of your first investors. They've joined later rounds of investments as well, to the point they're now a majority shareholder. But also because Rocket Internet is so invested in the food delivery space in general, obviously owning Delivery Hero and other companies. Do you find the relationship with Rocket has brought you a lot of benefits in terms of, they've proven that they can scale companies, they know a lot about performance marketing because they've built so many different companies in different regions. Do you find that relationship beneficial, or do you not get any advantages out of it?
So I think first of all we're HelloFresh, and I think everything from fundraising to company culture to how we deal, how we kind of like think about the business is very much centric on HelloFresh. But generally, like I would say, they're obviously very experienced investor very, very early on in the company, and have supported us throughout the life cycle so far. So for us, the relationship has been very fruitful. But in the end, like we're very much focused on what we as HelloFresh stand for, how we want to build up our brand, etc., and not so much attached to, let's say, is this Rocket? Is this not Rocket? Is this another investor, etc.?
Sure. What about the IPO? 2016 or 2017?
Again, I think for us, the kind of like vision that we have for the company doesn't really change whether we do an IPO or not. I think what we would find very hard at this stage is selling the company to someone, because in the end we've come so far over such a short amount of time, and we still have so much that we want to do that we're not really interested in selling to someone else and basically say, hey, that's it. So in that sense, for us, an IPO is obviously very attractive. But if that is in 6 months, 18 months, 24 months, that's nothing that kind of like changes our strategy for the longer run. We are well capitalized, still have a lot of cash on the balance sheet, so we don't have to do one. If there is like a great opportunity to do one, then certainly at some point, this is, let's say, our preferred avenue to go down.
Got it. What are some of the markets that you're looking at launching next? You mentioned 9 countries now. Probably going to scale it up to a few more. But what are some of the regions that you're looking at? Is it other countries in Europe? Is it Southeast Asia? Is it Latin America? Or do you really want to focus on the markets that you have now?
So we've recently launched 2 more markets, which were basically within, let's say, the geographic footprint that we've mostly been in for quite a long time. So we've launched Switzerland to basically cover, more of continental Europe, and we've launched Canada to basically cover all of North America. And with those 2, we've kind of like covered our bases in the, let's say, broader geographies that we've already been in. I think, I'm not saying we won't expand any further, but for us, definitely the, let's say, majority of growth is really where kind of like in our existing markets, because we cover the most mature and the largest e-commerce markets worldwide. And if you look at how HelloFresh looked like kind of like 4 years ago, what it looks like today, and kind of like try to triangulate that with what do we actually want to build up and how do we want to build it up, then there's still so much that we can do in those markets that the bulk of growth will certainly come from the existing markets. And that's also where we're mostly focused on.
Sure. A little bit of a different question. You've partnered with Jamie Oliver, who's arguably one of the most famous chefs in the world. What does that partnership look like, and how has it helped you scale the business?
So it's actually a partnership that we've been talking to Jamie and his folks for quite some time. So in the beginning, we were like thinking, hey, can we do like, can you make some meals for us? Can we bridge in some way how, let's say, what you do in terms of educating people about healthy cuisine, about cooking, about, becoming a chef. And at some point, during our talks, we actually said, like, why not make that a longer lasting relationship? Why not kind of like trying to cover different bases with that? And by now, we're basically using him for PR, communications, and some marketing. But mostly, he and his team are creating recipes for each of our geographies, one recipe per week. So among the menu of the week, there's always one recipe created by Jamie, and that is usually supported by some content, such as kitchen tips, such as certain advice, etc., linking to some of his videos. And that's kind of like, in broad terms, the kind of like scope of the partnership so far.
Got it. Well, I assume it's been successful because you've prolonged it and deepened the partnership. Do you see any other partnerships of that sort with other people in the future?
So what we have done at some points was basically we called it guest chef series. So we basically went out to interesting chefs, interesting restaurants, said, you know what, how about you create a recipe for us? We introduce you to our group of customers. We make a nice video in your kitchen. We kind of like talk about you. We kind of like introduce you to all of our consumers. And wouldn't it be great if next week 500,000 people are actually cooking the meal that you have created? Met like an impressive response from all the people that we spoke to, and I think it's like a great tool for us. The funny thing was actually that a lot of our customers told us after, like, it's been great content and we enjoyed reading about the chefs, etc. But the way that, you know, the recipes that you as HelloFresh create, I actually like them better. And that's something that, kind of like also helped us understand that it's not so much about, you know, getting as many testimonials, etc. in. It's really making sure that you understand what customers want, really making sure you kind of like make sense of all the data that you get, because we ask people, right? We ask people, how did you like the meals? What did you like about it? What was the cooking time? The number of ingredients, the complexity, the accuracy of description. So those are all variables that our culinary teams are basically have now experienced for 4.5 years on. And what we tend to find is that the recipes that we create, design ourselves, and then goes through all that testing process that we have with internal people testing it, external customer panels testing it, etc., that this process actually helps us usually deliver recipes that score much better than recipes from other testimonials, etc. Oh. So in that sense, we're very much focused in really building up the HelloFresh brand as HelloFresh, and not so much looking into, let's say, getting other people to do stuff for us.
Right, interesting. That's good feedback, for sure, from your customers. So I live in Belgium. I've had people come to my door to ask if I want to try out HelloFresh, which I've done a few times, just to reassure you. But some people don't necessarily like the fact that you're relatively aggressive marketing. And I was reading up on HelloFresh in preparation for this chat, and one of the things that comes up most is that it's aggressive marketing and hard to cancel. Would you agree with that statement, or do you think that's something that you've solved over time, or would you completely disagree with that notion?
So I think there's certainly been, let's say, some periods of time where we've basically probably been over enthusiastic because we've seen like great response to certain marketing channels, etc. And had been very successful in scaling up the company. So I would say, there might have been 1 or 2 occasions where we probably like overstepped a little bit, where we also had like external marketing partners which were basically pushing a little too hard because they were working on commission for us and those kind of things. So I think those are things that over time we have fixed, and where I believe that now we're like in a very good place. And with regard to cancellation, I like strongly disagree. I think we make it super easy for you to tell us when you want to go on pause, if you want to cancel, etc., etc. So I think that is actually something where, like I said, strongly disagree.
Sure. Okay. On a slightly broader level, if you look at the food delivery space, I know you're super focused on HelloFresh and your model, but if you look at all the takeaway.coms of this world, the Just Eats, the Take It Easy, Deliveroo, how do you see that playing out? Like, is there going to be a wave of consolidation in this industry, or do you see all of them growing?
I think, again, going back to the framework that I introduced before, basically saying people eat 90 meals per month, then if you look, how many meals do we actually cater to at the moment for a good customer, probably like 10 meals out of those 90. It's not mutually exclusive to using other food delivery services. So I think that, with the advance of technology, there is actually now is the time that a lot of those businesses make sense for the very first time in history. And I think that's actually where you see and will continue to see a lot of innovation, because food is just like, such a big part of everyday life. It's the biggest category of household spend. So it just makes sense for good entrepreneurs to think about, what can I do in the food space? It's the biggest category, almost not online penetrated so far. So, only if you say today about 1% of grocery sales happen online, then, just moving from 1% to 2% actually is a market that is a couple of tens of billions of dollars. So, which obviously should give plenty of opportunity for great models to exist and sustain.
Right. What are your thoughts on the last mile delivery? Because obviously for you that makes a lot of difference if that changes that dynamic. I read somewhere that 80% of the cost of delivering any package, whether it's food or anything else, 80% of it of the cost is actually in the last mile. So you have this, Amazon's trying out with drones. You have other companies in Europe building these self-driving delivery robots that actually take packages up to your doorstep. Are you watching this whole evolution? What do you make of it?
So I think, again, it's definitely a space that we're watching closely. And obviously, we need to get our meals to the customer. So we are very reliant on different logistics partners. We, in parts, do it ourselves as well. So in Benelux, in the UK, we have our own fleet of vehicles, which we use to deliver our packages. Generally, I think it's also one of those areas which has only started to innovate over the last couple of years. I think the iPhone kind of like made its debut in Germany in 2009. So, pre-iPhone times, pre-smartphone times, nobody could, or like an Uber couldn't even have existed. Like a lot of the logistics tracking solutions couldn't even have existed. So I think generally we're very, very early in the kind of like whole evolution of that space. Obviously, there seems to be some winners already, but I still think that, especially in the B2B space and in the overall logistics space, there will be more and more services advancing. We're watching it very closely. We still haven't decided whether this is one part of the value chain that we eventually want to own or not. Given that there is so much innovation going on, I tend to say it's probably something that others can do better if they're fully focused on, running that rather than also a marketing company, a culinary company, a food company, and a logistics company.
Good. I don't have a timer, so I'm just going to keep going until they drag me off stage. Again, on the broader level, you're focused on HelloFresh, but if you look at Berlin, because you're not from Berlin originally, we came here about 5 years ago when you started the company. How have you seen the startup scene locally evolve over the last 5 years? Because to me, from an observer standpoint, it's changed quite a bit. But I wonder what it's like for you on the inside.
I mean, I fully agree. When I came to Berlin and before starting HelloFresh, we've kind of like played around with the different business ideas, kind of like tried to reach out to the business angel scene, tried to kind of like speak to different funds, etc. And if I look back at the kind of like list I created back then it was basically 20 people on that list. And this was the whole ecosystem back then. If you look at it today with, you have first exits that have happened and a lot of kind of like angels, a lot of people not necessarily giving back to the community. Obviously, they have some monetary incentives to do so, but kind of like building up that ecosystem, just a lot more pots of money that want to invest in startups, that want to invest in technology. And I think the situation has changed dramatically and fundamentally. I think today, if you are a good founder team with a good idea, then it actually has never been as easy to find funding in Berlin as it has been today. And I think that with more and more companies also emerging out of Berlin, that it's just the start of a scene that's actually coming. So I think almost any time in the last couple of years, when you have seen a successful exit in the Berlin ecosystem, most of these founders actually then, start to invest themselves. And I think that over the past years, a lot of companies have been started, which will eventually become very successful. And I believe that, those founders will actually follow the steps that their successors have done and kind of like also deploy a lot of the money, a lot of the proceeds that they made with their ventures back into the ecosystem.
Yeah, fully agreed. Early days of a very interesting cycle. Final question, do you think you could have built this company anywhere, or did it need to be in Berlin?
Good question. Never really thought about that. I think, so there's certainly like a number of big advantages that you have in Berlin, like access to talent, access to, let's say, fairly cheap living costs, etc., to start up with. I think there's a number of startup hubs, which probably it doesn't make a huge difference whether you are starting a company in, let's say, London, at least pre-Brexit, Berlin, Stockholm, etc. But I certainly believe in the kind of network effects and access to talent pools that you have in startup hubs. So I think you have a much, much harder time to build a successful company if you do it, let's say, in Germany outside of Berlin. That I definitely believe in. So I think Berlin is certainly among the top 2 or 3 startup hubs in Europe. And we probably could have also built the company in one of the other 2 startup hubs, but not anywhere else.
Got it. Okay. Thank you very much, Dominik, for joining us and for supporting Toa in the first place. And hope to see you around today.
Thanks, Robin.
Thank you. Well done.